So, Nivedita, last time we were discussing the visit of General Yazov, who was
Right.
then the
Yeah.
defense minister of the Soviet Union.
Mm.
And I told you how I made friends with him.
Yes.
He had about five technical lieutenant generals with him, whom he left behind with me to discuss the various types of equipment and maintenance stores that we wanted to buy from the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, he went off on a visit to the Navy in Bombay and Goa and so on. But he told me that I must visit the Soviet Union. Now, I never had an intention to visit the Soviet Union, but nevertheless, since I'd had the experience of Czechoslovakia and the fact that the Russians were hated over there, I decided, all right, let's visit. Government was very happy to give me the sanction to visit the Soviet Union, which I did. This must have been about June or so, 1989. And I decided that I wanted to visit Turkey. Now, why I wanted to visit Turkey is because since a very young age, I had been studying Mustafa Kemal Pasha, who was known as the Grey Wolf, who was a major general in the Turkish army during World War I and defeated the British and Australian and New Zealand divisions and the Indian artillery division that was trying to capture the south of the Bosphorus Straits that is between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. There is a large island which the Turks were holding and which prevented the ingress of British Navy to the Straits of the Dardanelles. And Kamal Pasha was the Major General Command. He defeated the whole lot of the Allied armies there and became a hero of Turkey. After that, Turkey used to have a caliphate. And the caliphate was removed, which was Islamic in nature. And Kamal Pasha took over as the president of Turkey. He insisted on making Turkey a democratic nation rather than a Muslim-controlled nation. And so he ordered his best friend to organize opposition in the parliament as the leader of the opposition. And his best friend told him, look here, I'm your friend. You and I don't disagree about anything. He said, no, as the leader of the opposition, you're supposed to, whatever I say in the parliament, you have to oppose it. So like that, he started a democratic entity in the parliament. Also, the military became very strong in Turkey, and he was a military man. This man also made Turkey a modern state. For example, he gave instructions that there be no namaz done in public. It's a private affair, your religion. You have to do it in your own homes, not in the streets. And whatever time you want to do your namaz, you can't lay out your mat wherever you are in public. You have to go to a secluded area so that you can pray to your God on your own without making a public display. He also insisted that no women will wear burqas. So you would appreciate that in 1918 or 19, when he took over Turkey as the president, just after the World War I, he created a completely different nation there. And they also became a member of NATO after World War I. Now, and during World War II. So I had studied this man and the way he functioned right from his early ages. There's a book called The Grey Wolf, written by a very good author who really brought out the facets of Kemal Ataturk's character and conduct. And I thought he had been one of my childhood heroes, you see. So I thought I must go visit his mausoleum in Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey, and Leari, if I'm permitted to do so. Now, I asked for an official visit, but the government did not allow my official visit since our prime minister had not visited Turkey. They said, unless a prime minister first visits a nation, it's not good. So, yeah, meeting. We said, all right. So we awaited Mr. Rajiv Gandhi to visit Turkey, which he did later on. Meanwhile, since I couldn't officially visit, I made a trip for going to Russia for about a week. And from the Defense Ministry, I got sanction for 3 days casualty. And I decided during this casualty, on my return from Moscow, I'll visit Turkey. So that was the arrangement that was made. And since it was going to be a private visit and there'd be no official reception or transport or things like that, and your planes land at Constantinople, at Istanbul. And Ankara is about maybe 250 or 300 kilometers from there. So you've got to drive for a number of hours across mountainous territory. I told you earlier, when I was commanding the College of Combat, one of my students had taken the commandant's yacht, as you may call it, on the Birsha Lake, which is special blue sails that we had specially purchased. And he stated he knew all about sailing, so they allowed him to take that boat out. And he made some terrible mistakes in the way that firstly he capsized. Secondly, because he was getting late for coming back for some instruction in the evening, he insisted that the boat be towed back to the shore of the Birsha Lake, even though it was upside down and the sails were under the boat. So rescue people told him that the sails will get shattered if you drag them through the water like this. He insisted, and so the sails were shattered. And when he came up before me, I told him, you owe me for having destroyed the sails I had bought for this sailboat. And he had done the combat, a very good officer, a chap called Brigadier Mehta from the engineers. And he was posted as a military attaché to Ankara. So we contacted him, said that the general and his wife and one staff officer will be landing at Istanbul on so-and-so date. You will bring your car from Ankara to Istanbul to pick him up, and you will drive him to Ankara, and he will stay with you and your wife in Ankara for 2 nights. And you will also arrange with the government the permission to lay a wreath at Kemal Atatürk's tomb in Ankara. And I also said that since you'll be driving down alone, because he had a small car, so you'll be driving it. There was Surupi and myself and a staff officer, so 4 of us were enough. I think we all had small baggage, nothing big. So he said, yes, I'll do that. And I said, I'll pay for your expenses. That means the petrol expenses coming up and down. I said, that's how you pay me back for destroying my sales. He said, no, I'll certainly do. So this was the arrangement. Now, the trip to Soviet Union was arranged, and we landed in Moscow with a ceremonial reception and all that sort of thing. They put us up in some very nice accommodation. And Shruti had a lady as her personal protection guard and liaison officer. She was the captain from the commando unit of the Soviet forces. And she was the daughter of a general, by the way. And she was a top-class commando herself. And she knew how to handle various types of weapons. She would be dressed very nicely in a lady's dress, but she always had a pistol or something tucked away somewhere or the other. And she told me that she's a crack shot from about 20 yards. She can put every shot of a pistol into the bolt, the same. So a very interesting lady to meet. And I had a 2-star general as my liaison officer. Now, when I made my program for visiting the Soviet Union, besides the fact that they were taking me to St. Petersburg, which in those days was called Leningrad. They now made it the old St. Petersburg was the place where Catherine the Great of Russia had her headquarters and things. We wanted to see the museum of Catherine the Great, one of the great empresses of Russia. And they had another program to show us various sites in Moscow, the Bolshoi Ballet and so on. We were also scheduled to visit Kiev in Ukraine. That is interesting because the war is going on there now. So I had happened to visit Kiev and meet the 2-star general or 3-star general who was in charge over there of the Soviet forces. It was part of Russia at that time, part of the Soviet Union. This was the program. But in this program, I had scheduled a visit to General Yazov, the Minister of Defense, for 45 minutes, which was accepted by the Soviet Union when I sent the program. Though my host was General Verenikov, he was the army chief, but I wanted to talk to the Soviet Minister of Defense. There were certain things that were bothering me in my mind, and I wanted to clear those issues with him. And now we had an ambassador from India in Moscow. His name was Alfred Gonsalves. And he had been a year or so in Moscow as an ambassador. And when he met me, when he received me, he said that he had been trying to meet General Yazov for the last 1 year, ever since he arrived. But the general had not given him any opportunity to meet him. So he said to me that since you're the army chief of India and you scheduled a visit to General Yazov, I suggest you cancel that visit because the ambassador has not been able to visit the Minister of Defense, so there's no reason for the Indian Army chief to go with it. I told him I should lay off. That's my program. I'm not interested in your views on the subject. Anyway, the next day when I was supposed to visit General Yazov, my liaison officer came to me and said that your visit has been cancelled. And we've been informed by the Indian Embassy that this has been cancelled by the Foreign Ministry of India. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't accept any cancellation. They said, but we've already informed General Yazov and he is a bit upset. I told them, please inform him that there's no cancellation. I am certainly going to visit. Now what happened was that I think Alfred felt a little peeved that I was going to visit the defense minister without him having visited him. So he had got sanction from the foreign ministry to cancel my visit. But I told Alfred, I said, look here, I am not bothered with your foreign minister. He said, then I'll give you orders. I'll get you orders from the Prime Minister of India. I said, I don't take orders from Prime Minister of India. And Army chief, I've got my program cleared by the Minister of Defense in India, and I'm not talking to anyone else. So he came running when I was supposed to leave to go to Yazov. My cars were all lined up with the Philippine. Sophie was not supposed to come. I was going. She had a separate program. He came along with 4 or 5 cars from the embassy saying, I have to accompany you. I said, no, you don't have to accompany me. I refuse to take you because you've got a funny attitude to this business. He says, he had brought a whole lot of chaps, flunkies from the ambassador's office, mostly foreign service officers to record meetings. Then he pleaded. He said, look, I'm the ambassador and it doesn't look nice. So may I have permission to come with you? I said, all right, you come with me alone on the condition that you will not open your mouth and say anything. So this is a discussion between me and the general. I don't want any of your views there. So you can sit at the back and you can record. Foreign service officers are extremely good at recording discussion. Meticulous. I don't think any of our military people can compare with foreign service officers in the way they record every aspect of a discussion explicitly. So I said, you will do that alone and you keep your mouth shut. So on that condition, I took him with me and we came to Yazov's place. I had a Major General of the Armored Corps from my military operations directorate with me. He's also from our INC. And his name is Gulati, Major General Gulati. He retired as an army commander, Guru Gulati. So he was my staff officer. And then I had the Soviet staff officer with me, who was my liaison officer. We had the MA from, military MA from the embassy, who was Brigadier Ricky, also from the Armored Corps, who also accompanied. So they were all kept there. And now, General Yazov had his 4 or 5 top staff officers and generals with him on one side of the table, and my delegation was on the other side of the table. And now, before any discussion starts, the Russians have the habit of drinking a large number of toasts. All these toasts are neat vodka. So I've been warned about it. Because by the time you've done 7 or 8 toasts and have put down 7 or 8 pegs of vodka, you know your mind is not so clear that you can sort of handle whatever you have. Maybe that's the aim, actually. Then you get a bit confused in the head. The discussion can go their way. So there are a lot of plants in the room, plants all around the back of the room. So I had been given the instruction that what you do is when you say cheers and you know, put down the thing, you throw it over your neck so that over your shoulders so that it lands in the plant at the back. I think there's a nice blooming plant in a large container. And I think she must have been very drunk by the time we finished our 7 toasts. But then we got down to business, and General Yadav gave a whole lot of welcome talk speech for about 5, 6 minutes. Then it was my turn to stop. So I told him, Nivedita, as I recollect, I said, I'm not a diplomat, so I can't make long complimentary speeches. I want to come down to brass tacks. My problem is that what the Soviet Union had done, there were 3 mobile divisions of the Soviet Union, which were located on the borders of Inner Mongolia. Now, if you look at the map of China, uh, on the northwestern border of China, that is beyond the Tibetan plateau, you have the Gobi Desert. Then you have Mongolia. Mongolia is in 2 halves. What the Chinese call Inner Mongolia is under their control. And Outer Mongolia is under the Russian control. See? It's an independent state, but it has its loyalties with then Soviet Union. And it's a beautiful place. It's a steppe land. It's really a high altitude desert, if you like it. And they're very good horsemen. They're very good at hunting with hawks and eagles. And, you must be remembering the history of Chinggis Khan and Kublai Khan, who conquered the whole known world in their time in the 12th century. They're very hardy fighters. They have in that time conquered the whole of China and conquered right up to Moscow in Europe and up to Vienna for that. Anyway, so Soviets had 3 mobile divisions in what the Chinese call and what we call Outer Mongolia, on the border of northern China. Now they suddenly, without any notice, removed the 3 divisions. With the result, the Chinese had about 4 or 5 mobile divisions facing these people on their side of the border. Moved those divisions to Tibet opposite us. This is where the concentration of Chinese army took place in Tibet. So I was very concerned, and I told General Yadav that you may be a friend of India, but you don't show much friendship in actual practice because you have gone and taken those 3 mobile divisions without by your leave or even informing us. With the result, not only 3, but 2 extra 5 mobile divisions have come into Tibet opposite us. And that makes our defense of our northern border so much more difficult. So the least you could have done as a friend was to discuss this issue with us before removing your divisions. So he got a little taken aback with my aggressive statement. Went into a long explanation. And the crux of this explanation was that the Soviets no longer had the money to deploy the divisions and pay themselves. This is our economy has gone for the sake. What happens in communist system in the data to try and understand it is that everything is paid for by the state. So whatever you may like to earn as an individual or as part of the Soviet system is paid by the state. It's only as pocket money for your pay. But basically your wealth and you are part of the government of the Soviet Union, of the communist government. Secondly, whatever your expenses, that means your schooling of children, your transportation, your heating systems in the winter when it's very cold. The temperature goes down to -40, -50 Celsius. How can you survive unless in your home you have very heating systems with boiling hot water? All that is paid for by the state. No taxes are collected from people. So therefore, how do the economy survive? Second point was that in the tussle between the Americans and the Soviets at that time, which continues even now, as you can see, the Americans went for more and more high quality weapons, equipment, latest designs of missiles, atomic weapons, strategic bombers. So to try and keep up with their defense against NATO, as one might say. The Soviets also had to spend all this money, and they have a very good science system, and they have got very good weapon system, but they all cost money. And the result was that the Soviets economy dropped out of the bottom, and they were not able to handle the expenses. For instance, the value of the ruble came to almost zero. You won't believe it. That according to the official rate, I think at that time, 12 Indian rupees were equal to one ruble. But I had Indian rupees, I didn't have rubles with me because our finance ministry being so cagey as it was in those days, it's not so cagey now because of our lack of foreign exchange. Though my official trip was accepted by the government and I was going on an official trip, I am supposed to carry some local cash in case of any necessity. But the government and the finance ministry was not able to give me that before I left. So I was told by my staff that don't worry, you just carry Indian rupees. Those are good tender in Moscow and everywhere else. Sure enough, for instance, I wanted to buy some long playing records of the Soviet. They've got some excellent composers of the classical music, like Tchaikovsky, for instance. And I wanted to buy some of these records. And Shrupi's liaison officer, the young lady, she said, General, I'll take you. She went there and a long playing record in those days in India would cost about 70 rupees each. But for the rate of 4 rupees each, I bought these about 12 of them, which meant that though the official rate was, I think, 12 or 16 Indian rupees to the ruble, they were giving 4 or 5 rubles for 1 Indian rupee. This is the collapse of the economy. So the crack up of the Soviet Union was taking place because of the failure of the economic system. Communism didn't seem to function there. So I got interested in this. I spoke at length with Yadav and said, what are you going to do about it? So he told me some very interesting points, which our ambassador had heard for the first time, and which India, for that matter, heard for the first time, and nobody else in the world knew. He said, what we are planning to do is to get out of the boxing ring with America. I said, how do you do that? He said, firstly, these East European countries like Eastern Germany, Romania, Hungary, and people like Ukraine, and so on, would be permitted to detach themselves from the Soviet Union so that we don't have to pay for their, and then they can manage their own finances or they can join the West. I said, well, if NATO is your enemy, led by the Americans on the West, how will you manage the fact that you give up all these Eastern European states, which were known as the Warsaw Pact? They were all part of the Soviet Union at that time. And you allow them to become free and join the West, shall I say? Then isn't that going to affect your defense? He said, no, these people are poor. East Germany is much poorer than West Germany. And once they join the two Germanys together, then West Germany and NATO will have to spend at least huge amounts of money to bring them up to the level of the West Germany. It will take them another 20 years. By the time the 20 years takes place, Soviet economy would build up again. And we'll be able to manage that. This was the idea. So we all wrote this down, and Alfred Gonzalez was writing very fast, put all this down on paper. And he told me later that he'll send it to the Ministry of External Affairs in India. I said, yes, you do that. And I also wrote that in my report that this is happening. Many people in India, especially the foreign ministry, didn't believe that this is happening, despite the fact that Yazov told us. And he said that he's a very staunch friend of India. And there's no question of his upsetting anyone. But the fact is that they don't have the money to maintain these many forces, so they are mothballing these divisions, sending them home, and mothballing the equipment because they don't have the money to keep them going. This meant the collapse of the Soviet Union. The second point here is that the collapse of the Soviet Union also was being created by the then president of the Soviet Union, that's called Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev, as you know, was talking about perestroika and glasnost. That means openness and trying to change the communist system. But the senior officials of the Soviet Union, that is Yazov himself as the Minister of Defense, the head of the KGB, and the various other senior functionaries of the Soviet bureaucracy, that is the communist bureaucracy, were very much against what Gorbachev was trying to do. Gorbachev had got one-to-one with the USA, and many people in the Soviet Union told me that he seems to become a spy of the CIA. He's selling the country down the line. But as luck would have it, they had no control over Gorbachev. I must tell you a few things that happened after this, which is very interesting. Gorbachev had decided to go on a 2 weeks uh, holiday, shall I call it, to some dasha or what they call rest houses that they had on the Black Sea. He went out of Moscow, went to the Black Sea, and there was a Soviet battalion which was placed there around him to guard the president. And Yozov actually told that Soviet battalion that Gorbachev was not allowed to leave that. So, in other words, he became a prisoner in the Dasha in on the Black Sea coast and was not permitted to come back to Moscow because the rest of the bureaucracy, etc., was trying to get another president on the scene. Now, the president that started coming on the scene was a man called Yeltsin. And Yeltsin, as you know, lasted for about 5 years, but he liked the bottle a lot. And I don't think he was much of an effect on the Soviet governorship. He came into deals with the United States that, look, we are collapsing, so we want to make friends. But the United States suggested then that the Communist Party should be abolished. Gorbachev agreed. And an order was passed that the Communist Party is abolished. Now, if you abolish the Communist Party, then the state collapses. I give you an example. You know, we have our Indian bureaucracy running the country. When you look at a politician, the politician is basically trying to win the next election most of the time. Yes, they do a lot of work for the country also, but at the same time, they are very concerned about the next election, not only in the center, but also in the provinces, because that's where the strength in the parliament comes. So you'll notice that every few months there's an election in India, right? So that's what the politician is doing. Therefore, the country is being run by the bureaucracy. Now, we may like it or may not like the bureaucracy. I'll give you an example. Supposing from tomorrow I say that the bureaucracy no longer exists, this country will collapse. The train will stop moving, then trade will stop, movement of ships and movement of goods will stop because there is no system if the particular department of government is not functioning. That is what happened to the Soviet Union. Now, I'd come back, but I was watching this very carefully because I knew what was happening there. I'd come back to India, and I must tell you that slowly, in the next 1 or 2 years, the Soviet Union, the collapsed Soviet Union, was taken over by oligarchs. Now, oligarchs are very, very rich people who became rich by cheating the state. To become a powerful man with a lot of money, businessman. And he's got a lot of private armies, if you call them, or like we would call them gundas, who force the issue when they want to do something. For instance, if the trains have stopped moving from Siberia to where, the Ural Mountains, dividing the European Russia from Eastern Siberian Russia, east of the Ural Mountains are all the mining areas where you get raw goods, you get You get mica, you get gold, you get various metals, iron ore, etc. They have to come in trains to the western side because all the factories on the west of the Ural Mountains. These trains stopped moving because there was nobody to pay the engine driver and nobody to give the fuel for the engine. See? So the oligarchs took this over, told the engine driver at the threat of a pistol that you will run the train and I will pay you so much. So they slowly took over the raw goods coming from east of the Urals to the factories, and they took over the factories and made a lot of money for their own pocket and not for the state. This is the condition during Yeltsin's time. Yeltsin lasted 5 years or so, and since he was mostly drunk, the man who started becoming a little more powerful under Yeltsin was Putin, because Putin was a normal officer of the KGB. KGB is the intelligence service, and he somehow, because he's a very fit man and advising good on health points, etc., became a bit of a favorite of Yeltsin, and Yeltsin appointed him as the next president of the Soviet Union after 5 years. So by about 1995, Putin had taken over as the president of Russia. But the destruction of the Communist Party of Russia was what killed Russia, and the Americans knew that. I must tell you something else, that once the deal was done that the Soviet Union is stepping out of the boxing ring with America, and wants money from America and from the World Bank and from the IMF to build up their economy, and the Americans decided to send three professors from Harvard University, economics professors, to help the Soviets restructure their economy. I have only one comment on this. When you are a very good professor of economics, it doesn't mean that you're a good economic handler practically. If you want to be a finance minister or a person who handles the economy, you have to have practical experience. Not be a professor in a university where you're teaching students who later on become, if they join the economic trade, become practical advisors to various companies and so on, and get the knowledge of how the market functions practically on the ground. But if you're a professor and you're sent to Soviet Union to advise on the way the economy has to be restructured, you can rest assured that that economy is going to fail, and the Soviet economy totally failed. This is just one of the reasons how the crack up of the Soviet Union took place. Now, I heard and saw all this. Yeltsin was a friend of mine, and he was very bitter about this. In fact, at one stage, when I left and came back, maybe a year later, because I visited in 89, by about 91, the Soviet Union had collapsed. And Yeltsin and some of the other friends who were the top leaders of the various departments of the government of Soviet Union at that time, they put Gorbachev in jail, as I told you, they tried to run the show. But Yeltsin, on the streets, I don't know if you saw the television. I had an experience about the television. If you look at your television in those days, mostly run by CNN in America and BBC in London. So whatever is happening, you show large crowds throwing stones and things at everybody in Moscow. And the whole world said that the whole of Soviet Union is collapsed. Because there are crowds in the street and nobody can get them out from there, and they're throwing stones, doing other things. We even saw Yeltsin get on top of a tank and start firing the tank gun at the White House, which is known as the Soviet Parliament, to bring to heel the 4 or 5 bureaucrats who were trying to run the show. This is the situation, Nivedita, how a country collapses. And I saw that firsthand. I wrote a very detailed report to my government and to the foreign ministry. So did Alfred Gonzalez as the ambassador. It takes India time to understand anything like this because they half the time don't believe what you're writing and what you're saying to be true. Just some other visits that I made there, I wanted to see how Soviet homes are kept warm in the winter. Now, Moscow is a very large city. You can imagine Delhi or Bombay. There's so many districts, right? Now, each district inside the city has to be kept warm. So I went to an underground station. They've got a very good metro system underground. All the metro stations are like museums, beautiful paintings and all that sort of thing, and lovely music playing, all classical music. Anyway, it's like you enter like an underground station, and you have huge boilers over there, boiling water, which is being pumped to the district, to every home. So I was looking at this and I said, what is the system? This is the boiling water has to be boiled under pressure to almost double the boiling point of. That's why it's a boiling point of water, let us say 100 degrees Celsius. You are boiling it till about 200 degrees Celsius under pressure. Then you are pumping it so that it goes around the district to every home. The 5-story building, 6-story building, each one got 10, 15 flats per floor. And you've got these water radiators in each room, which you can turn on and the hot water flows through and you get warm. See, that's how you survive in a minus 40, minus 50 Celsius at winter. They don't have the Himalayas to protect them. So then this water comes back to the pumping station, and they had temperature gauges at the pumping station to show me that the water that comes back after traveling around the district to all the homes has to be above the boiling point of water. That when you boil it to 200 Celsius, by the time it comes back, it's still 100 Celsius. See? Then they heat it again and send it again. So I said, this must be costing $1 billion. How the hell do you pay for that? They said, government pays for it. And one of the reasons why the economy collapsed. So the communist system of the economy, where everything belongs to the state and the state pays everything to the citizen, there's another factor. Karl Marx did this theory of communism mostly because of the workers who were wanting to fight against the management of factories, right? I must say in passing, the Chinese communism system is different. The Chinese communist system is a peasant-based from the agricultural work, whereas the Soviet system was the factory work. You know, in the factory worker, how to make them equal to the manager. So if you're a manager of a factory, you've got one child and he goes to school, right? And you're running the factory, you're responsible for running it. And you've got workers under you, one worker has 5 children. And his pay is 5 times more than yours. So even though he's just a fitter who's tightening a bolt somewhere in factory, his pay is 5 times more because his children are 5. This is the equality of the human species. Secondly, the system might function if the people who are running it run it with enthusiasm and motivation, despite the fact that the pays are not very much. But human beings are human beings, and human beings are corrupt. Therefore, they make money on the side. And when they make money on the side, then the system doesn't function. Because in the capitalistic system, we know that everybody is a criminal and everybody is a crook and he's going to make money. And you try and catch it. You catch some, you don't catch others. So cases carry on. But the fact of the issue is that everybody is suspicious of everybody else. So hopefully the thing functions. And you have strikes and things like that. So that if the workers are dissatisfied, then they go on strike. Okay. Now that was the interesting visit to Soviet Union. We also visited St. Petersburg, where I wanted to go and see. There are 3 huge buildings with 5 floors each, which are the Museum of Catherine the Great. I must tell you that her coat of arms was the double-headed eagle. If you know what the double-headed eagle is, it's an eagle. And it's got 2 heads, one looking that way, one looking that way. Idea here being that it's got all-round vision, so you can't escape the vision of the monarch, you see. So in our cavalry in India, we have one horse regiment called the 61 Cavalry, which has a double-headed eagle. And it was a combination after the British left of the Mysore Cavalry and 2 other units of cavalry from Jodhpur Lancers and Kachwa Horse and so on. They combined all these to make the regiment of 61 Cavalry. But Maharaja of Mysore, his coat of arms was a